I'll start off with one of the simpler pieces of tubing just to kind of review of how to sweep tubing. Start a sketch, and I'm going to start with the path. And this piece is, I call it the rear main tube. It's the piece in the back that goes up to the seat post. Now, this is not my first iteration of this, so I figured out that dimension when I went to assemble it. So that's something you'll have to determine specifically as you go to assemble. When you start bending and notching tubing, those numbers won't be nice round numbers, unfortunately. Don't forget, you always want to, if there's a bend in the tubing, and we're going to try to bend tubing as much as possible here. We don't want just square corners. The smallest radius that you can bend is 3 inches. Now I'm using a small diameter, 3/4 diameter tubing, so I can use a 3-inch radius, but use the smallest I want you to use for 1-inch tubing is a 3.5-inch radius. And whenever you bend tubing, you gotta leave enough room. So see, this run here is 4 inches long, so I can get a 3-inch bend in there. If it's even if you put it exactly at 3 inches, I don't think it'll bend it. You have to have it beyond 3 inches to put a bend in it. So that'll be my path. Let's finish the sketch. Now I'm going to sweep that tubing. In order to do that, I need a plane on one of these two ends. It really doesn't matter which end. So go to Features, Reference Geometry. You want to click on Plane. If you click on that end point and then click on the length of the run there, so click on that line there, with those two inputs, oops, I didn't quite get it, with those two inputs, talking too much I think, endpoint, and then there, the software will know that what you want is a plane on the end. So if you just, with those two inputs, so that's good, that's the plane. I'm going to create the cross section, which is those round tubing. It's just going to be round. So I will sketch on that plane. You hit Control 8, it'll put it perpendicular to you. I need to draw 2 circles. Now remember, it's hollow tubing, so don't just draw one circle. You have to draw the OD and the ID. In this case, now this is a really small frame. It's going to be 3/4 inch tubing. Your frame is not going to be 3/4 inch tubing. And the ID 0.62. So now I have my 2 sketches. I have the path and I have the cross section. So now we'll go to Features. Don't go to Extrude. You need to use the Swept Boss Base tool. Now there's 2 inputs. One is the cross section here. You can see this diagram. The software knows because I just created that sketch. It's assuming that that's my cross section, which is correct. And then the path is the second input. So in that blue box, you just need to click on the path and it will sweep the path. So again, the sketch which shows the cross section goes in there, and the sketch that shows the path you want to sweep. So there's that piece of tubing. And I can turn that plane off over here, just hide it. Now this piece of tubing has a notch in it because it's going to fit up against another piece of tubing, so we want to put a notch on there. So I'll need a plane to work with, which is going to be that one. I'll turn that plane on. So I'll just do a new sketch on that plane. And that's going to be a circle. Make sure you get it on the midpoint. And it's going to be the diameter of the tubing, which again in this case is 3/4. Yours is not going to be 3/4. Finish that sketch. So you can see what I have is that sketch on the mid plane. I'll do an extrude cut because it's straight, so I can, whenever I have a straight run, I can do an extrusion. If it has a curve, I have to use a sweep. And I'm going to actually extrude this in both directions, and you can just put a number in there if you want, and then come over here to direction 2 and do the same thing. Just make it some number that goes beyond the edge of the part. So sweep it in both directions, and it will cut. Remember, that's an extrude cut. So there is my tubing. I'll turn that plane off. And that, again, when I butt that up against another piece of tubing, it's going to be a nice match and be a very strong connection. So there's my first piece of tubing.